Ah, hello. Hello. How? What it do? What it do? Sorry, guys. Just gonna get the chat up here on my phone. Just gonna hang on for 1 second. I should have this ready to go before I even get on, shouldn't I, really? How? Alright. Alright. So, yes. Everybody's freaking out about World War III, and for very good reason. We're about to enter the global battle royale. The big one we've all been waiting for. We've all been sat at the edge of our seats waiting. When is it going to happen? How's it going to happen? Who's it going to be? Who's going to start it? Where's it going to go? Where's it going to end? Well, we'll be answering some of these questions, although obviously we cannot answer them all. I'm just going to quickly post this to Twitter, and then we can get into it. We can get right into the news! Yes, I stole that from Keemstar. I don't give a shit. Yeah, we're gonna talk Iran bombings, we're gonna talk all this stuff, but we're gonna talk about the broader context of all this as well, because I made a video a few years ago called The Current State of Things, which, I'm not gonna lie, a little bit incoherent. I haven't watched it for a long time. I should probably go back and rewatch that, but I did make some predictions in there. And from what I remember of what I said, I'm pretty sure that, like, all my predictions came true. And I'm just basing this on, like, inferences from things I'm reading, not a theory of mind of, like, psychopathic leaders and stuff like that. Also just their stated preferences about, like, how they are conducting their governance and stuff like that. And also incentives. There are lots of incentives for people to be doing what they're doing. And we're going to get into all this as we go along, but we need to scale things back, right back, all the way to COVID-19. So we're going to get into that in just a second. Discussing World War III, Iran, Russia, China, America, and how this can all go to shit. Oh, maybe I should put Israel too. There we go. All right. Now I've posted that to Twitter. Let me just get that posted. There we go. All right. Let's not procrastinate any longer, okay? Let's not procrastinate any longer. We got 3 guys in the chat. Welcome to everyone. Please like, subscribe, do all that fucking gay shit. Right. So, we need to go back. In order to paint the picture of where everything is going right now, we have to go all the way back to the forgotten times, the forgotten realms, the memory hold era that is the COVID era. Now, I just had a debate this morning with Tom Foolery, who was actually in my chat yesterday. I went onto his stream this morning. I woke up. I'd only been awake for about 10 minutes. And I'm not going to lie, not my best showing. Not my best showing at all. I was running on fumes. I hadn't done a deep dive on this in quite a while. I was just kind of running on some older assumptions that I had from a couple years ago that, to be honest, my view has not changed all that much. However, one thing I will say is, after having that debate, I will have to cede a point. I will have to admit that I was wrong about something, and that is, I don't know for 100% sure if China released COVID on purpose, okay? However, the idea of the lab leak is not unsubstantiated. In fact, there is fairly strong circumstantial evidence for this to be the case, and there is a very strong argument made by the FBI as to why it may not be of natural origin. And that's in this Vanity Fair article. Now, everything that I show you here on this stream now, I'm not going to read through every single one. I'm just bringing them up to show you key points as we move through each thing, but I will link every single thing that I've put up here. I will link it in the description after I finish the stream. So if you want to refresh about 5 minutes after the stream, you'll be able to find all these links there. So this Vanity Fair article was probably one of the better articles I could find on the FBI's investigation into the lab leak possibility. And they are very even-handed. They do entertain the natural occurrence argument and all that kind of stuff, right? But they go pretty deep into the situation surrounding the Wuhan lab and what it was actually studying. And they were studying various, what you would call COVID-related viruses and things like that, right? Now, in initial reports that were brought forward by this lab when they were basically, kind of giving their inventory of viruses that they were studying, they actually casually missed out one that was later revealed, which actually comes out because of later probes. Now, this article, what date is this from? Sorry, I should probably date this just so we all know where we're coming from here. I swear it said the date on it. Yes, February 27th, 2025. So this is fairly recent, okay? This is not years ago. This is just a few months ago that this was put together, and they have multiple they have an interview with an FBI agent who was on this. He's also a scientist. There's also multiple scientists, and they're also referencing multiple probes, both by Republicans and whatnot, and all this stuff, right? So it's fairly thorough is what I'm trying to get through to you, okay? And so basically, when you read through this, it kind of outlines the story of how things developed in terms of this investigation and why the FBI came out the other end basically saying there's a strong possibility that this is the case. And basically the people involved with the studies on these viruses, so here we go, we're at this point here. So there's a mine shaft, right? So the natural argument, it kind of subsists on this idea that there's bats and stuff like that have these viruses, these COVID viruses that can sometimes, not very often, but sometimes can spread to human beings. Now, when they did the trace, because you can backtrace the mutations of where the virus came from and to create a kind of genetic lineage from where it may have originated, right? Now, they did this with COVID-19, and when they did this, they basically found out that the bat in question that it probably would have come from, that was like, the very most likely it possibly could have been, was actually 1,000 miles away. Its habitats were 1,000 miles away from Wuhan. So that's a pretty big hole in this explanation, isn't it? When we really think about it for a second. Now, they were, in this laboratory, were actively, now you can read this here on this part here, they were actively, so this is what this she-woman, she's the leading researcher in the Wuhan thing, she failed to mention in her paper was that this particular virus, which later became known as COVID-19, had been renamed. Its original name was RA4991, and this particular virus actually came from another part of China. So this is what they are saying is basically the most, the closest to what could be considered the closest relative to COVID-19. Now, this does suggest that if it's a relative and it's 96.2% similar to, that there may have been something in between that created that. Now, we don't exactly know what. Now, it could have been mutagens that happened between other animals and stuff like that, but it is revealed that in this laboratory, they were purposefully altering these viruses. And so the possibility that the natural cause becomes less and less likely the more you start to activate your little neurons in your little brain and you start to actually think it through. You start to go, okay, a bat from like 1,000 miles away in a different part of China caused certain people to die. This virus that caused those people to die is now suddenly, with 96% relativity, has now shown up in Wuhan. What's that about? Well, there's a laboratory in Wuhan that studies these viruses. They actually renamed the virus that existed in that other part of China. I can't remember where it was from. It was like, it begins with a Y. It's in this article. You can read it if you want. And basically, they renamed it into this new one, which later then became named as COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2 or whatever the fuck, right? So this idea of the lab leak is fairly well supported. There's also other evidence to suggest this as well, that the laboratories where they were doing these experiments were actually lower level because they were struggling to find people to actually be able to man and conduct research in the higher level laboratories. So they were kind of functionally not operational. So they were doing them in other laboratories in the Wuhan region, or this Wuhan lab itself, the one that we suspect, that didn't have the BSL level 2. So they needed like a BSL level 4 or something, or they needed a higher one, but they were actually doing them in BSL 2 level systems. So there's lots of issues here. Lots of issues with how this went down. Now, it's not just the FBI that have come out with these kinds of ideas about the lab leak. No, also the CIA says that the lab leak is most likely source of the COVID outbreak. Now, we'll have a quick read of this, but now it said it had low confidence in this determination. But at the end of the day, this they might just be hedging their bets a little bit here. But at the end of the day, this is again another point in the direction that says the lab leak could be possible. Okay? Again, and next up, not only has it been the American intelligence agencies like the FBI and the CIA, but we also have German spy agencies believing COVID likely started in a lab. Germany's Foreign Intelligence Service believed there was an 80 to 90% chance that coronavirus accidentally leaked from a Chinese lab, German media says. Two German newspapers say they have uncovered details of an assessment carried out by spy agency BND in 2020, but was never published. The intelligence service had indications that the Wuhan Institute of Virology had been carrying out experiments where viruses are modified to become more transmissible to humans for research, they say. China repeated its denial, saying the cause should be determined by scientists, and pointed to a World Health Organization investigation which found the lab leak theory was extremely unlikely. There was no consensus on the cause of the COVID pandemic. It's hotly contested still, but there are people saying that it is definitely possible. Not only that, French Academy of Medicine, COVID-19 likely result of lab accident. The French National Academy of Medicine has now come out officially to back the theory that COVID-19 was likely caused by a lab leak in Wuhan, China. So the French National Academy of Medicine was now come out in favour of the lab leak theory to explain the origin of COVID-19. This position adds weight, I think that was meant to say weight, to the theory already supported by German intelligence and the American CIA and FBI. I don't know why I didn't say FBI, but both of which concluded in recent weeks that the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic originated from a leak at a Chinese laboratory in Wuhan. Last January, an investigation under the Biden administration also backing the lab accident theory was made public. In March, German media reported that their national intelligence services had likewise concluded that a laboratory leak was the most likely origin of COVID-19 pandemic. And I think this is just because there are big holes in the natural argument. So it's not that these viruses don't come from animals or don't originate in animals. The problem is that when we actually trace back COVID-19's origins in terms of its most likely genetic ancestors, it would originate in certain bats that existed in certain parts of China that are 1,000 miles away from Wuhan. This is a major hole in the story, major hole with no explanation as to why that would ever possibly be the case, okay? So if that hole makes it extremely unlikely that this particular strain, like COVID-19, came out of nowhere. And also, COVID-19 is this other virus, that is related to COVID-19, it's got a 96% match. That means that there's a small percent changed, almost like a modification happened or something like that to make it more, what's the word? More contagious or something like that. Or I don't know exactly. I'm not exactly sure what the modification would be, but it would somewhat insinuate something of that nature, would it not? So there is something to say there. Now, the thing that I would need to revise my opinion on, okay, and this is something that I said on the tomfoolery, show, which I probably shouldn't have said, but hey, sometimes you just got to lay it on the line and say what you think. Now, I said China have done this on purpose, and I do have reason to believe that. Now, I will say, it's a possibility that this was just an accident, and this just then became a springboard for other things that happened. It became like an opportunistic situation, right? I don't believe that personally, but however, my beliefs are my beliefs. They're based on inferences and ideas, based on these actions and how things have transpired over the years, right? I'm using kind of like theory of mind, psychology, all this kind of stuff to kind of draw up an idea of why I think what I think. Now, of course, I can't say with 100% certainty that what I think is necessarily the truth, so I will say that at the end of the day, we have to acknowledge that it could just be an accident, right? So I'm not going to say otherwise, but I will come at this analysis from my belief. So I'm going to say that there's a strong possibility it's an accident, but my personal belief is that China did this on purpose, okay? And I have lots of reasons to believe that, and I'll kind of pepper that through as we go through various evidences, or at least what I believe are kind of evidences of this. Now, you can call it jumping to conclusions and all that stuff, but at the end of the day, that's what we're all doing. We analyse certain evidences, we make certain inferences from it. It is what it is. Some of us are right, some of us are wrong. Only time will tell who had the correct analysis. But what I'm not going to do is act like a little baby back bitch and pretend like my opinions don't exist. I will say what I think, and I will say why I think it. So, we're going to go next. So I'm just setting the stage here. We're getting to COVID, and it could be an accident, it could be real. It could be a purposeful attack to subvert the global economies, right? So, I've had to use Grok a couple of times here because I use Grok as like a glorified search engine, right? Because it does actually compile sources. If you're looking for actual results, especially for a very long-ranging question, I'm not going to sit here and do hours and hours of Google searching when I can get Grok to do the Google searching for me to find the information that I probably would have found myself anyway, right? So, take it with a pinch of salt at the end of the day. I'm just letting it be known. I've used a little bit of Grok just for some of these parts here, but most of it I'm giving you sources that are just straight up from news organizations and stuff, right? But just for a couple of questions, a couple of parts of this, I just had to use Grok just to compile certain evidences, right? So again, take it with a pinch of salt. If you're not into your AI and all that stuff, then fair enough. I understand if you're skeptical. It is what it is. I've just used it as a tool. So, right, let's go into the next thing here. So, next up, I wanted to know, or I wanted some evidence of, did China influence the lockdown? Because part of my theory on all of this is that China released this on purpose to subvert the economies of the world. And part of the way that they did this was the lockdowns and the lockdown guidelines that were propagated across the world. Now, not everybody followed them. Some people put them in place in their own way, and that's fair enough. That's up to them. But I wanted to know if China had any kind of significant impact on how this was rolled out and the guidelines that were made. Now, I will say, I was wrong on a couple of things here when I was speaking on the tomfoolery thing. I I wrongly assumed there was more people on the committee who were Chinese. There was one Chinese person. Everyone was from different nationalities. There was one Chinese person out of the 15 members of the initial committee, okay? So I was wrong about that side of it. However, when they, because I asked the next question, did China influence the guidelines in any significant way? Now, this was a deep search, so it used 71 sources. And what I will say is, obviously, because China was ground zero for all this, the research does suggest that China influenced the WHO's COVID-19 lockdown guidelines significantly through its early response and representation in WHO committees. So, although I was wrong in just how many Chinese people were involved in making the guidelines per se, the influence that Chinese government and Chinese members of committees had, their influence on these was significant. It was high. China's role in the process, China's influence was also direct through its representation. A Chinese, whatever, I'm not going to say the names because I'm just going to butcher it. A Chinese epidemiologist was a member of the WHO's international health regulations, which advised on the pandemic response. A part of this committee, he contributed to decisions that influenced the WHO's guidelines, ensuring China's experience was considered. And to be fair, they were the only experience to go off, right? So, you know, there's, again, I'll link this Grok link so you can read through this yourself as well and look at the sources that it has used if you want to find problem with it or whatever, but I think it's fairly thorough. So it's not to say that they were the be-all and end-all. I'm sure there was other people influencing this as well, but China did have some probably a fair significant, if not the major significant contribution to how these lockdowns were conducted. And I have a suspicion that part of this situation, the lockdowns actually contributed to the economic dysregulation, like kind of like the destruction of economies all over the world. And they knew this because China have been market communist, I guess, if you want to call it that or whatever. They've had free markets for quite a while. Well, I say free, but you know what I mean. They've been moving in a more like capitalistic direction. And what was the point I was going to make here? So basically, they understand supply and demand. And they understand it very well. In fact, they practice capitalism probably better than the USA does at this point, right? And they understand these principles very well. They understand how to abuse them too, just as most elites do. And so they purposefully created lockdown suggestions and guidelines that essentially shut down like half the economy. Now this, if you understand anything about the basics of economics, you'd understand that the principle of supply and demand is just so integral and important. And the lockdowns were basically a stopper on that. They were basically completely fucking with all the supply and demand elements to the point that it actually manufactured a very large transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich, and there was lots of very select companies all around the world that benefited from this. Now, next up, what was the question here? So on this one, I wanted to know what followed from there. So I wanted to know, okay, so if China were going to set themselves up in this way, again, this is just going off the assumption that maybe this was done on purpose, okay? Could just be a happy coincidence, okay? Could have been an accident, could be just a happy coincidence that this happened in this way for China. But I wanted to know, was China's economy set up in an advantageous way before COVID, such as having key exports, PPE, and other resources needed to conduct lockdowns, etc.? And I made this point on Tomfoolery's show and they poo-pooed it, but I was indeed correct. Before COVID-19, China's economy was indeed positioned in a way that provided certain advantages for managing the pandemic, particularly in terms of its production capabilities and key exports. Here's a concise breakdown. Manufacturing powerhouse. China was the world's leading manufacturer of personal protective equipment, producing about 50% of global supply. By 2019, it accounted for roughly 28% of global manufacturing output, just in general, I guess, giving it a massive capacity to scale up production of medical supplies when demand surged. Key exports. China dominated global supply chains for medical equipment, pharmaceuticals, and electronics. It was a major exporter of ventilators, testing kits, and raw materials for drugs. In fact, it was 80 to 90% of certain active pharmaceutical ingredients. This allowed China to secure domestic needs and later export surplus PPE during the pandemic. Now, I did have this stuff floating around in my brain. I just didn't have all the names and numbers and whatever. I just knew that there was certain information that, like, yeah, they had all this stuff going on, right? So I make the inferences, I go down the logic chain, but not a lot of people can do that. Not a lot of people can do that, and obviously this was like kind of slightly dated information that I was using as well. I was just, it's not that I didn't know, it's that I was just kind of doing it on the fly, right? And it was a little bit dated. But it didn't mean that I was wrong. I just didn't have all the information to hand. I just jumped on quickly to have a quick chat, and that was that, right? But they poo-pooed my assertion that China was in a very good position pre-COVID to have all this happen. So next up, resource availability. China's centralized system and vast industrial base enabled rapid mobilization of resources for lockdowns. It had the infrastructure to produce and distribute essentials like food, medical supplies, and tech for surveillance, like health code apps. Its experience with SARS in 2003 also meant it had protocols and infrastructure for rapid response, like makeshift hospitals. Economic structure. While heavily reliant on exports, 20% of GDP in 2019, China's large domestic market and state-driven investment model provided resilience. It could pivot resources internally to support lockdowns without immediate economic collapse, unlike smaller, trade-dependent economies. However, there are vulnerabilities. China's economy was slowing pre-COVID, right? So let's just put this in perspective. 6.1% GDP growth in 2019, a 30-year low. Now that means, right, most GDP growth per year for most Western countries is around 2 to 3%. Sometimes it's a bit higher, sometimes it's a little bit lower. But it's not 6.1% consistently or higher for like 30 years. So China's economy is obviously insanely good right now. Now, that doesn't necessarily translate to quality of life for everyone. GDP is not necessarily a good measure of that, but it's a good measure of understanding the how well the government and the businesses are doing and how much production they are pumping out, especially for military purposes and things like that. So, if GDP growth in 2019 was 6.1%, that is quite high, actually, in relatively speaking, around the world. I think at that time, America was boasting something like 4 or 4.5% or something like that as being like amazing. We have like the most amazing economy right now, or some shit like that. I don't know, actually. What was it in American GDP in 2019, GDP growth, I should say. Growth in 2019. It was a 2.6% annual change. So they had 3 times the GDP growth in that year than the USA did, right? And this was slow for them. So, Thought Patrol said, "I like to remind you, mate, that nothing ever happens." Complete bullshit! Obviously, things are always happening all the time, and people are just retarded. That is basically the crux of that. But anyway, so this has all been going on in the background, right? And, I'm going to say something. I know a lot of people will roll their eyes and pretend that I'm just being insane. But I'm going to say something right now, okay? I'm a Total War player. I don't know if anybody in the audience is a Total War player, but when you are a Total War player, you learn how to manage your funds, manage your economy for war. That's pretty much the aim of the game, right? You go over and you take over, you field armies and you take over other places. You lock that down, you secure that, you build up your economy, rinse and repeat. Obviously, I'm not saying this is literally the same as real life, but what I'm saying is certain principles involved in that do exist in the same way in real life. So if you are trying to gear up your country for a war in coming years, you probably want to be raising your GDP as much as possible, especially in military production and business production, and also in key areas of commercial stuff, like, so again, like some of this PPE stuff and whatever, hand sanitizer, all this stuff. You kind of want to be positioning yourself in a very particular way where you become the main exporter, right? You become the main people that everyone's trying to buy from, because this will give you funds to fund your war, right? So let's get into the next part. So obviously COVID-19 happens. COVID-19 happens, and it devastates economies across the world. So I wanted to know, because again, this was another claim made on the Tomfoolery show. I said that China had one of the better, if not the best, recovery since COVID. And they challenged that and said, no, America's had the best. America is just the best. It's had the best recovery since. It had the fastest and the best. Now, I'm not going to say America hasn't, and maybe it did outpace in certain places, but again, this is just wrong, apparently, or at least according to Grok anyway, and they are using several sources. They are all linked here. Again, I'm going to link all of this in the description after the stream, so you can read and check through all this yourself if you would like. So again, take it with a pinch of salt. It has come from Grok. Maybe there could be some errors in here. I'm not going to rule that out, but as far as I'm concerned, this is fairly thorough. So anyway, China's economic performance since the COVID-19 pandemic has been a mixed bag when compared to other major economies, but it has shown notable strengths and weaknesses. Here's a concise breakdown based on available data. Strengths: early recovery and growth. China was one of the first major economies to recover from the initial COVID shock. In 2020, it achieved a GDP growth of 2.3%, the only major economy to avoid a contraction that year. While global GDP fell by 3.4%, in 2021, China's GDP surged by 18.3% in the first quarter. Though that was skewed by 2020's low base. I don't even know exactly what that's meant to mean, but okay, sure. I guess because of the contraction, it's like a relative thing. But anyway, they maintained maintained a robust 8.1% for the entire year. By 2023, growth was 5.2%. Now that's actually a bit lower than what it was in 2019, right? That was a historic low in 2019, but now we're at a time in 2023 where there's global economic instability. So let's just make sure we're understanding the backdrop here, right? This is not in a vacuum, which was slightly above its target. And then it was 5% in the first half of 2024, outpacing many advanced economies like the US, which was at 2.5% in 2023. And Japan was at 1.9%, and Germany was actually just at 0.3%. Right? So no matter what you want to say, and I do take the point that on the ground, there's probably issues in China around like how their shit translates to the actual people on the ground. But in terms of GDP, which is their gross domestic product, which is like their military, their businesses, all that shit, right? Which a lot of them, they try to conduct it so that it is beneficial to the state, beneficial to war efforts, beneficial to these things. They are still generating a lot, right? So they're generating good GDP growth in relation to other countries. And they've also had low inflation. Unlike the US and Europe, which face higher inflation, China experienced deflationary pressures with CPI down 4.7%. I think CPI is to do with like it's the price index, right? Consumer Price Index, yeah, since 2020. Stabilizing prices but signaling weak domestic demand. Weaknesses. So there has been uneven recovery. Okay, so it hasn't been perfect for China. But as we've just seen, though, it's been pretty good generally, though, right? China's recovery has been hampered by a property sector crisis. Now, the property stuff, again, this is more to do with internally how this translates to the people living in China. We're talking about war here. We're talking about World War III and war. This is somewhat irrelevant in the grand scheme of things, right? If we want to break it down in that way. So it's worth mentioning, but it's not necessarily relevant to is China gearing up for war or not, and how are they positioning themselves for war, and how they're going about positioning their economy to sustain a war. So zero COVID impact. Strict lockdowns until late 2022 disrupted businesses with over 460,000 small enterprises closing in 2022 alone. This led to a 3.9 GDP loss in 2022. And unemployment rose as well. So again, these are somewhat internal issues that are not necessarily related to how well the country is doing in terms of its war efforts and its ideas for war. These are things that can be more or less rectified within a few years with some, economic tweaks, especially after they've come out of these lockdown situations, right? But they've already managed their economy in such a way that lockdowns didn't necessarily significantly affect them in the worst way possible. So structural slowdown, all that shit. Anyway, comparison to other economies. The US saw a sharper GDP contraction but rebounded strongly, 5.9% in 2021. However, high inflation and interest rate hikes have slowed growth, 2.5% in 2023. So long term, US has done a worse, more or less, in terms of GDP output. China outperformed in 2020 and 2023, but faces weaker domestic demand. The EU contracted by 6%, with slower recovery, 5.4%. Germany and France lagged in China's growth. However, Europe's recovery has been more balanced, with less reliance on exports, which is a good thing. So it's been a mixed bag. It's been a mixed bag for everybody. But the point I'm making with this is that the lockdowns, more or less, were actually pretty good in terms of the way it's positioned China in the world. And it's not just that. In fact, this is a point that I forgot about, but China trading oil in, is it yen they have? Yuan, sorry. Yuan. The People's Bank of China and the Central Bank of Russia signed a memorandum to facilitate the exchange of crude oil using yuan. So that happened in 2017. Wow. Okay, I thought it was during all this, but that's fine. China's yuan on the rise in oil trade. But petrodollar here to stay. So that basically they now have a competing petrodollar or petro currency. Which is also very significant because obviously they started that in 2017, but then all of this that has happened with COVID and everything else has obviously bolstered that, so that it's now actually a competing currency on the petro market, which is a very significant thing. This is all part of the global paradigm shifting, okay? So next up, I want to talk about, this is part of the reason why I think China did this purposefully, okay? This is where some of my suspicions creep in. And again, you can call me conspiracy brained if you want, and that's fine. I understand that not everyone's going to agree on this. That's okay. You don't have to agree with me. These are just my suspicions. This is just what I'm thinking when I see some of this stuff, right? So they downplayed the early signs. And I don't know if anybody remembers, but there were videos of tankers full of disinfectant going through the streets that seemed to be just ready to go as soon as this shit hit, right? And they were trying to cover it up. They were trying to pretend it wasn't happening, and they were minimizing what it was. But why would they do that? Why would they want to? Now, there is a couple of reasons why they might do that. Okay, so number one, they don't want to look incompetent. Okay, that's not the worst assessment. Yes, they could just be trying to save face or something like that, right? I don't know if I really believe that, though. it feels like to me perhaps they were looking for some plausible deniability, perhaps. Or they were trying to cover it up because they wanted to try and make it a bit murky about where this may have originated. But they probably fucked up by, if they did do it on purpose, they probably did fuck up by doing it in Wuhan where that lab is. Probably not the best thing. So that kind of does lend credence to the idea it could have just been an accident. But I'm still kind of dubious about this just because of the way that they've conducted themselves. So we've got like some stuff here. I don't like to use Wikipedia too much, but I've just used this because this kind of sums up a few different things here. So we can see from some of these, again, you can read these for yourself. I'm not going to read through all of them, but they downplayed early signs. We all know that. They tried to cover it up essentially in the initial. They also silenced a lot of medical workers. So these people were given government injunctions or they were imprisoned and stuff like that. So they were told they were making false comments apparently here, and they were disturbing the social order. And so the police were cracking down on scientists and doctors and stuff, trying to kind of talk out about it. So there was the arrests or disappearance of citizen journalists. So as of December 2020, around a year after the outbreak, at least 47 journalists were currently in detention in China for their reporting on the initial coronavirus outbreak. So again, there's this going after journalists, going after people legally, just trying to silence the idea of this getting out there. Even to the Chinese people themselves. In the early stages of the outbreak, the Chinese National Health Commission stated it had no clear evidence of human-to-human transmissions. Why would it say that? However, at this time, the high prevalence of human-to-human transmission was evident to doctors and other health workers. So, on the ground, it was obvious to everyone, and that's what they were saying. They were being silenced, but then the National Health Commission comes out and says there's no clear evidence of it. Why would they say that? So they maintained that for several months, it seems like. So the human-to-human may have started in December 2019, and the Chinese government maintained the stance that human had not been proven until the 20th of January. So did it start in November or end of November, and then... Right, so maybe it wasn't several months, but it was like a month and a half or some shit like that, right? So yeah, there's just very suspect shit going on here, and there's room to say, again, there's room to say it was a genuine accident and they're trying to save face, but I think there's also some room to say that they did this on purpose too, and they're just trying to give plausible deniability, muddy the waters. Maybe they were panicking a bit because they didn't expect global eyes to get on it so fast. They thought, it's Wuhan. Nobody really even fucking knows about Wuhan outside of China. Like, what, people aren't going to know about this. We already control the media in China, so, hopefully this shouldn't really get out, but then it did. Propagation of multiple locations of origin. So the Chinese government has made repeated claims that the COVID-19 did not originate just in Wuhan, but across multiple locations around the world. How would that be possible, though? How could that possibly happen? How could the same virus, the same strain of virus, magically appear in multiple locations around the world at the same time? That's obviously retarded. So that sounds a bit like a hasty lie. That sounds like a hasty lie to try and cover up something that they were really doing. The Washington Post reviewed Chinese state media as well as posts in social media and discovered that anti-American conspiracy theories that were circulating among Chinese users had gained steam through a mix of unexplained official statements magnified by social media, censorship, and doubts stoked by state media and government officials. So yeah, I do remember that as well. I do remember that there was like a little bit of a flame war between China and Trump at the time. That I think Trump accused China of doing it on purpose, then China, or maybe it was the other way around. I don't know if China said it first, but either way, they both accused each other of planting it. So China accused America of planting it in America, and then America accused them of the same thing, but in America, like it was very stupid. But I don't think either of those things are true. I don't think anyone planted it. I think, like I say, I think personally, my personal opinion is China did this on purpose to create the conditions that would make it advantageous for them to go to war, or well, them and their allies, not just them and their allies to go to war. Chinese state media propagated the theory that the spread of the virus may have started in Italy before the Wuhan outbreak. Which, again, no evidence for that whatsoever. Literally no cases of COVID were found until not loads, but several months after it was seen in China. So, misleading accounts of statements by World Health Organization's top emergency director speculating the virus could have originated outside of China. So again, these human market Huanan market swabs. So the market was closed. So this is like the wet market thing. So the raw data from the swab samples of the live animal market were released or possibly leaked. No raw genetic data had previously been accessible to any academics not working at the Chinese institutions. And some of them were uploaded to an international database. A preliminary analysis of this data was reviewed by the international research community, which said that it made an animal origin much more likely. But then on March 14, an international group of researchers presented a preliminary analysis at a meeting at the WHO, at which Chinese COVID-19 researchers were also present. On the 17th of March, the WHO Director General said that the data should have been shared 3 years earlier and called on China to be more transparent in its data sharing. Why were they not being transparent? There exists further data from further samples which has not yet been made public. And the WHO's COVID-19 technical lead called for it to be made public immediately. Now, as I went through earlier in the FBI investigation, they uncovered that China were actually holding back certain information that had to be later released because of probes into the origin. So, there's... And this stuff where they did get the origin, or the most likely origin of the genetic lineage of COVID-19... came from bats that existed 1,000 miles away from Wuhan. So again, this doesn't make proper sense. So yes, they're trying to... It looks like what China are trying to do in every which way, as you run down this list, every which way they're trying to go, oh, it was actually in Italy. Oh, it was this. Oh, America did it. Oh, this happened. Oh, it didn't actually originate in China. This is... Then there's going, oh, wait, actually, it's wet markets. It's actually just animals. Actually, it just came from animals. Guys, just believe us. It's literally any other thing apart from this lab in Wuhan that specifically researches viruses. Literally anything and everything else, which is obviously... It just starts to come off very false. And like they're floundering around trying to come up with ideas of how to pass this off. There's evidence that the Chinese government has made a vigorous effort to play down its early failures. So there's like I say, you can have a look at this page, but like I say, this creates a very suspicious situation, right? Very suspicious situation. Now, during this time, over the years, up until now, Russia and China have been ramping up their military production in a way that is just... Again, as a total war player, when you're building your armies, you build up your economy for a bit, you have some low-level armies just to defend your borders for a while. And then once you have sufficiently kind of raised your economy, then you can, boom, make a big full stack army, right? And you can support it. So, top US military commanders express urgent concern over rapidly expanding Russian and Chinese military industrial capabilities. Russia, despite heavy losses in Ukraine, is rebuilding combat systems swiftly, outproducing Western arsenals significantly. Concurrently, China's naval expansions far outpaces US capabilities, boasting vastly superior shipbuilding infrastructure. Both nations have harnessed economies on a wartime footing, vastly increasing defense budgets and military production capacity. So when we're looking at this this development of them ramping up in this very, very quick, rapid way, and they're doing it in every facet of their military thing. So it's not just their, oh, we're just working on our drone technology for a while. Oh, we're just working on our ships for a while. No, it's everything. It's all of it. It's all their weapons, all their defenses, all the ships, all the drones, everything, and they're working together. They're sharing tech together. Simultaneously, Iran and North Korea bolster military supplies, heightening strategic worries. I wonder why they'd be doing that as well. Why would they have been doing that over the years? With America's defense spending declining and its military-industrial base needing rejuvenation, US leaders seek urgent bipartisan investment to enhance military readiness. So the point I'm trying to get through with this is that for a long time, these countries that we're seeing, kind of launch into wars and stuff now, have been ramping up this stuff. And you only do this, really, when you are preparing for conflict, to initiate a conflict on some level, or that you anticipate a conflict soon, maybe a defensive one. But when you're ramping up this much and the kinds of things that they're actually doing, it doesn't seem very defensive, okay? I don't think it's an accident that after COVID, it's China and China's allies that have been the aggressors since. They have been the primary aggressors on the global stage. So we have to take that into account when we're looking at this situation and drawing our conclusions. So again, as well, over the years, Iran has boosted its domestic drone and missile production amid Russia-Ukraine conflict. And we do know that Iranian technology has been found in Russia on the battlefield being used. Obviously it's also been used by the proxy groups and stuff like that. So I'm not going to read through every single one of these, but you could, some of these I'm bringing up. Some of them I'll read through, but some of them I'm just bringing up just to show you that, like, these things are happening and you can read them for yourself. These things are happening though, right? We can't just ignore that. Why would these countries be doing this? It's not an accident. Right? Not only have Iran been ramping up their general capabilities in their military exploits, Iran has accelerated highly enriched uranium production as well. And that was in February of 2024. So this was like last year, just over a year ago. And it's producing approximately 9 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% uranium, 235 per month. So this is basically, more or less, this is them saying we more or less just have the capability to make nuclear weapons now. And this obviously came to a head yesterday when the USA bombed Iran's nuclear infrastructure and nuclear refineries. And they did this. People are saying, oh, this is going to cause war with Iran, and then we're going to have World War III. So that's not how it's going to happen, guys. America are not going to war with Iran. All right? That's not how it's going to play out. They did this because they knew if they let it continue for the next few months, it's very likely that Iran could have several nuclear weapons made up in that time. And having those weapons ready, especially in the prospect of an imminent World War III, we have to be tactical. We cannot be allowing the enemies of the West, i.e. Iran, China, stuff like that. Some of them already have nuclear weapons. We can't allow them to have more. It's a strategic part of that world, that area of the world, that Israel has those nuclear weapons, okay? Allowing Iran to then have them could then potentially put Israel at risk of being nuclear bombed, obviously, and then that would wipe them off the map, and then we would lose key strategic a key strategic place in that world war, right? Like being able to deploy into the Middle East and stuff like that, right? So this is the issue here. This is the issue that we're having. So it's not that America are going to go to war with Iran. They made a tactical choice for the long run because Iran, like it or not, whatever you want to say, Iran have broken every single deal, every single agreement that has ever been made on them enriching uranium. So their intention, even this is way back with like Bush and Iran and Obama, sorry. Even way back then, they had agreements with Iran about this, and every few years, the USA would check in and go, "Hey, so you better not be enriching this uranium," and then the Iranians would go, "Sorry guys, but we kind of have been enriching this uranium. We're sorry about it, but we have been." And when they find this out, they go, "Hey, okay, you've enriched it this much, but you can't go any further than this." And then they go, okay, we won't go any further than that. And then they break the agreement again. And then they break the agreement again. And then they break the agreement again. And it kept happening over and over again. This is why Trump ended that agreement in his first term. Because it was obviously a joke and bullshit. And Iran were using it purposefully to keep America kind of off their back a little bit so they could secretly do what they wanted to do. Next up, we have Kim Jong-un, who announces a leap forward in defense industry with his new largest 5-hectare plant to boost arms to exports to Russia. So again, we're looking, and this is, when was this? This was actually quite recently. This was on the 21st. In fact, what date are we on now? That was yesterday. So Kim Jong-un announces leap forward. So basically what we're looking at here is an obvious, very, very obvious allegiance that has been going on for ages, by the way. This isn't a new development, okay? I'm giving you the newest, most recent information. But these alliances, these allegiances, have been in play for well over 10 years, probably, and have been coming to a head for a long time. Because it's not like Total War, okay? It's not like Total War. In half an hour, you can have an army built up, right? In real life, this takes several years, depending on what you're doing. And these people have been obviously building up and bolstering this for the last 10 years or so, and getting to this point. So they're making a new factory so they can specifically ship out arms to Russia, and obviously for themselves as well, I would imagine. So they're doing these things purposefully. They're coalescing. They're formulating like specific arms deals with each other. And they're not doing it for no reason. They're prepping for something. They're not just... This is not casual. This is not just, hey, we just want to strengthen the military a bit and, you know, we just want to, like, just make sure that we're kind of up to date and stuff. That is not what is going on here. These are massive industrial scale efforts that point to a different intention. They point to a different intention that is just, in my opinion, kind of undeniable at this point. Not only are North Korea arming their allies, well, they're all arming each other. Let's just put it that way, all right? It's not that there's one in particular that's arming the other. It's that they're all arming each other and they're all bolstering each other with these either sales or aid or whatever you want to call it. They're obviously doing very favorable deals. They're doing these things on purpose to bolster each other's economies and stuff like that. These are the kinds of things you do in a Total War game. These are the kinds of things you do to bolster your economy and all that business. So North Korea has deployed thousands of troops to help Russia terrorize Ukraine. So again, this is a coordinated effort that we're looking at with these nations. These are not just like random occurrences. We can't just go, oh, I wonder what... I can't really say that North Korea would really get involved in this. I don't even really know if North Korea are that aligned with China. Blah, blah, blah. I don't even know if North Korea and Russia even like each other that much, you know. Blah, blah, blah. People will just say any old shit when the literal writing is on the wall. It's right in front of their faces. These are the same people who, when Russia had Ukraine completely surrounded with missiles, boots on the ground, basically a blitzkrieg method. They were going to blitzkrieg the whole country. Now, it didn't necessarily work out the way they would like, but when they surrounded that country, even when they had it surrounded, a lot of these people would be like, they're not gonna, it's just posturing. They're not gonna invade. They're not gonna do shit. These are the same people saying these things, and then guess what? They invaded. I said they would invade at the time. I predicted that they would invade because it was fucking obvious they were going to invade. You do not position loads of military around a country in that way without thinking that you're going to invade. It was a very slim chance that they were not going to invade. It was way more likely they were going to invade, and they did invade. Obviously, of course. So it's just like, you have to remember, a lot of these people saying all this shit, hedging their bets, going, we don't really know. We can't really tell. We can't mind read these people. If you have a theory of mind, if you understand history, if you understand the incentives these people have, these people don't want to be the global underdogs anymore, right? They don't want to be considered these weird backwater places that have no stake in the world, and America's just the best, and Europe is just the best. They don't want to be in that position anymore. And now, after COVID, and all the ways that COVID has disrupted and hurt the world, and thrown everybody into disarray, it set the stage for them to start chasing those ambitions that they've had for decades. That they've explicitly stated for decades that they hate America, they hate the West, they hate Europe, they hate all the imperialism and blah, 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 even though they're all basically imperialists themselves as well. So, which is just complete bullshit. But, but the point being is that they are power-hungry psychopaths, most of these people, right? That includes our own leaders as well, by the way. I'm not ruling them out in that equation. But all I mean to say is, if you understand anything about those kinds of psychologies, then you will realize that it is actually fairly predictable what they're doing. Everything that they're doing now is very predictable. In fact, it could be argued that the sanctions that America has made has actually incentivized these countries to coalesce. They already had incentivizations to do it way earlier anyway, but these prolonged sanctions and stuff like that made it even more incentivized for them to do that, even more incentivized to coalesce and ally and create this situation, right? And then spring a global biological weapon that then sets the stage for their warlike machinations, which now they have more reason to do, well, more leverage to do. So before that, I just want to say, part of the strategy for China, Russia, and for this to work, for this to work, they have to play a very smart game. Now, I'm not going to say it's necessarily going to work, but we have to kind of outline what their probable strategy is. Now, when they were probably formulating this, when COVID happened, now whether it was an accident or whether it was on purpose, they probably did formulate an idea that, okay, because of the way this is going, this is a good time to start doing what we want to do. Right, we've been building up to this for a while. Now's the time to start putting stuff in action, right? We're getting old. We don't want to die without doing our plans. We've been building this up for like 10 years or more. Let's start making some moves. It's now or never. So Russia obviously is probably, in their heads, it was who's got the most leverage, who's got the best military capability to create a prolonged war, who should go first. Russia was the obvious candidate in that equation, because they'd already invaded Crimea. They already had very good military. They already had means to surround the country because they had borders all around Ukraine. They had lots of, for them, and specifically their standing, it made a lot more sense for them to do that and also to sustain that war, while others prepared and waited for their chance to spring. And you can tell that this idea and that they had been formulating these plans for a long time due to the fact that they have been doing military operations together for years. Years and years and years. So cooperation between China, Iran, North Korea and Russia, current and potential future threats to America. So each one of these states threatens the US interests, not just US, like global interests really, but yet they are far from a coherent bloc and largely pose threats. See, they say that they're far from a coherent bloc, but I honestly think partly they like to... Because you know Russia, right? Russia are very cerebral. And they like to fund different political groups to give different ideas so that people are confused about what the reality of things are, right? So I'm not going to say that that they aren't fractured. Maybe there is some friction. I don't know, but I will say it's a very strong possibility that they like to put out things that present an idea that like maybe we're not all really that coherent, but then behind the scenes, actually no, we're super in lockstep with everything we want to do. We're coming up with plans. We want these plans to go off without a hitch, so we've got to maintain a kind of front that is kind of makes us look like we're not so in league, or that we're not so organized. But I don't believe that's true. I think they are very organised. And that is borne out in the way that North Korean troops are sent to Ukraine, the way that tech and arms are being traded and sent and developed between the countries, the way that they've been doing military drills together all around various hotspots that will probably become war zones in the future. So anyway, let's have a quick read of some of this. So the structure of world politics is evolving in ways that challenge American global power more than any time since the end of the Cold War. The United States now faces risks to its interests across East Asia, Europe, and the Middle East. To make matters worse, China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea are increasing their support for one another. Historical precedents from the 1930s and the early Cold War suggest that even deeper cooperation among them is possible, and that a more coherent bloc determined to blunt and roll back US power worldwide might develop. I think it's already developed. I think we're too late, guys. I think we're too late. I think it already developed. Political leaders as varied as former House of Representatives Majority Leader Steny Hoyer, I don't even know who that is, whoever, a bunch of fucking officials, and Mitch McConnell have thus warned of a powerful new anti-US axis on the rise. How likely is this scenario? How likely? It's like 100% likely. His paper examines the state of cooperation between China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea and identifies paths that could lead to their closer cooperation and paths that would not. There is no question that each one of these states threatens US interests. Their current cooperation deserves the attention of US policymakers and intelligence analysis. So, right, let's put ourselves in the shoes of these leaders, right? So, historically, maybe they have had some beef. Right? Historically, maybe they've had some beef. Maybe they don't always agree on how to do communism, how to do this, how to do that. Maybe they've got some cultural clashes, whatever. So maybe they've had some beef. But, you know, they all turn around in the back rooms and go, hey, okay. You know, we don't like that America's taking over everything. We don't like that America does all this shit. They fuck with our countries. Their CIA goes around destabilizing things. They fuck with our interests. They do all this shit. And that's not necessarily invalid to think, is it? Okay, right? America do have some culpability in this situation as well. So I'm not going to be sitting here like, oh, America's just some innocent angel, because that's not true. However, when we look at these people, if they were to coalesce, if they were to, let's say 10 years ago, they still have a veneer that they might not be, they might have a facade that there is some conflict between each other, right? So they go, okay, they say to each other, okay, if we start teaming up, America's going to sniff this out. And if we team up in a very obvious way, straight away, then we are going to... this is not going to go well for us. So we need to continue this kind of facade that we have some beef, that we're not cooperating, that we're not completely coalescing, so that we don't generate too much suspicion. However, they probably do know that eventually, when they want to do drills, when they want to do XYZ, when they want to do trades, when they don't want to do military things, eventually they are going to have to kind of show their hand on some degree. They're going to have to kind of show their hand and go, okay, actually, we kind of are aligned. And like I think BRICS was that kind of thing. I think there was all kinds of there was all telltale signs, but again, it's like people just don't want to believe what's happening in front of their eyes. Everyone's living in this like weird denial about it all, and it's very frustrating. It's a very frustrating situation to be in, because to me the actions speak louder than words. If Iran, Russia, North Korea, and whatever are doing military drills together, that means they are considering working together as militaries. That's the only implication you can get from that. Why would they want to work together as militaries? Potentially for wars. What wars would they want to engage in? Well, they all have historical grievances in their local areas, right? And in these local areas where they have these grievances, they're all connected to America. And guess what? We all hate America too. So we need to figure out a plan that weakens America, so that and the Western world at large. We need to come up with a plan that can break that down, break it all down, and make it much harder for America to be able to respond. And I think that is what we have been witnessing for the past 5 or 6 years. We have seen that plan be put into action. That is just my belief from these various things. So they're saying it's not a coherent bloc. They share nothing like the military ties, diplomatic structure, and economic cooperation that existed among the Warsaw Pact countries during the Cold War, for example. They are far from enjoying the level of political, economic, diplomatic, and technological cooperation that exists between the United States and its allies and partners. Now, this was written in 2024. Even at this point in time, I would not have said that. I think, like, what evidence are they using to even say that? All things seem to point towards that actually being the case, more or less. They would do. When did BRICS come out? BRICS came out a few years ago, right? How is that not indicative of this? It just... I struggle with these assessments sometimes, because it just makes me go, how are these guys analysing this? But also, maybe they're just saying it to try and like downplay what they know, to make themselves look a bit more ignorant, so that they can maybe make plays later. I don't know, man. That's going into like all kinds of shit. It's hard for me to say. I'm definitely speculating a lot there, but anyway. US policymakers therefore need to monitor the signs of deepening cooperation between them, but they should also be careful not to overstate the group's coherence, and thereby encourage them to solidify into a real bloc. To the contrary, the aim of US policy should be to divide them, just as the United States managed to split China and the Soviet Union during the Cold War, and to destroy the myth. Yeah, but I think they're well hip and wise to that now. I think China's like much hipper and wiser to how, like, they've probably learned from that. Right? You guys are sitting there like as if they don't remember. They don't remember what happened in the Cold War. Like Putin, Xi Jinping, I keep forgetting his name, fucking Kim Jong-un, all these fucking people, they have extensive historical knowledge. They have access to all the documents that their country has that is on this. So they know the real inside information about all this. You think they don't know that America tries to divide them and do divide? In fact, they're probably using those techniques against us right now. In fact, there's probably 100% they are actually doing that. 100% they're doing that. I'm not going to say all the ways they're doing it because I don't know, because it's hard to pinpoint like what's just a Chinese thing, what's a legit. It's hard. The misinformation campaign and the propaganda campaign is hard to distinguish what is true, what is false, all that shit, right? But we can't deny it's happening. It's happening. So we have to be aware of that. They are employing the same tactics now. They've learned from those mistakes, and they probably do realize we have to be extremely uniform now. We cannot allow America to separate us like they did during the Cold War. And I feel like it's a bit weird that America would take it for granted that they could just potentially do that again. I don't know if they possibly could do that again. Improving the United States' relationship with China offers the best hope at doing so. Yeah, but that's also a double-edged sword, because keep your enemies closer, right? That's like the phrase, keep your friends close, but keep your enemies closer. Because you want to know what they're doing. So if you have like a really good relationship with America, but China has the machinations, again, this is like a Total War game thing. When I'm playing Total War, one of the things that I do if I want to go after somebody, while I'm building up my economy to go after war for them, I make a trade alliance. I make an actual alliance, maybe. Or some low-level non-aggression pact, something like that, right? And I pretend like I'm getting on so well with them, but they don't know that in about 3 turns' time, I'm building a full-stack army to go and completely decimate their entire country or their entire area. That is kind of what people do, right? And they employ similar tactics in the real world, obviously. So this will be difficult, but China is not the only central player in this group of US adversaries. It is also the player that makes the group strategically relevant in the first place. Without China, the importance of the other 3 would not be all that different from a decade ago. But it's not just 3, is it? There's probably other secret alliances being made that we are not necessarily aware of. We don't know if World War III happens in the next year or two. We don't know which way certain countries might flip. Some might want to stay neutral. Some might not want to do X, Y, Z. But we really don't know. Some people who we might consider to be allies to the West right now, like maybe some of the Muslim countries, we don't know if they might just side with Iran and go after Israel. We don't know which way it's all going to go, guys, because we have to remember this is all Machiavellian. This is all realpolitik. This is all double crossing. This is all maneuvering, chess playing, bluffs, lies. We don't know which way things will go. We take a lot of things for granted because it's surface level shit that politicians and leaders are saying. This doesn't necessarily mean what they're saying is true. So we have to look at their actions more than what they say. So that's how I make my inferences about these situations. So cooperation in pairs so far. Although China, Russia, Iran and North Korea are now often viewed as an aligned group, cooperation among them has been almost entirely bilateral so far. So this section explains the state of cooperation between each pair and increasing the order of importance. So Iran and North Korea have been doing drills. China and Iran have been doing drills and deals and whatever. China and North Korea have been doing drills. So they've been doing separately. North Korea and Russia. That's quite extensive. Iran and Russia. But as we will see, as we go into the next ones, they've actually been doing even more joint ones in recent times. So China, Iran and Russia hold joint naval drills in Mideast as tensions rise between Tehran and US. And when was the date for this one? This was March. So obviously this is before obviously before yesterday. So China, Iran and Russia conducted joint naval drills Tuesday in the Middle East, offering a show of force in a region still uneasy over Tehran's rapidly expanding nuclear program. So the joint drills, so they're doing now open joint drills, Navy drills together. So this was obviously always the plan. They were always going to start working together. They probably, in the past, in that report we were just looking at, they were probably doing it bilaterally in that way to try to avoid as much suspicion as possible of them being a coherent block. But you're not going to be having all of them doing drills together. It's still, they've got to do it somehow. And they were trying to give that plausible deniability. But if you're not a complete retard, you'd be able to put the pieces together pretty quickly. Right? You'll be able to put the pieces together. People, stop being retarded. It's right in front of you what is happening. It is right in front of your eyes if you just open them to see. So next up, we've got an article from the Economic Times. When did this come out? This was June 20th. So this was just a couple of days ago. Missiles, militants and markets. Pakistan's quiet alliance with Iran runs deeper than you think. So again, we've got secret alliances that are starting to come to the surface that I don't even know if it was like that secret per se. But I think the engagement between India and Pakistan, I think, kind of woke people up, because India are actually part of BRICS, but I don't know if they are really aligned. I think that Pakistan is probably far more aligned, especially militarily, and with the goals of Iran, Russia, China, and all the rest than India are. Personally, I think India are probably much more aligned with the West, just overall. As tensions flare between Israel and Iran, an unexpected regional realignment is unfolding quietly but unmistakably. While Gulf Arab states walk the tightrope between maintaining ties with the West and managing regional outrage, yes, because most people in the Muslim world back Palestine against Israel. Even if they're Sunni, Shia, whatever, all over the Muslim world, most of them are against Israel, right? Pakistan included. And the governments, like it says here, the governments in the Middle East are trying to maintain their stances. But why would they be doing that? Because why wouldn't they share the sentiments of their public? Maybe they do. Maybe they do share the sentiments of the public. But for now, they have to put on a brave face. They have to pretend, for Machiavellian purposes, to be friends and allied with America while they muster, while they create the conditions to make a move. But right now is not the time. They are waiting for the escalation to occur so that they have more time to build before the penny drops. So as tensions flare between Israel and Iran, an unexpected regional realignment is unfolding quietly but unmistakably. While Gulf Arab states walk the tightrope between... Oh, I just read that, sorry. But this is not just about ideology. Behind Pakistan's rhetorical support for Iran lies a complex web of shared threats, historical affinities, economic dependencies, and strategic repositioning that defy easy categorization. So one of the most significant factors linking Pakistan to Iran is geography. Obviously, I think they share a border, don't they? The two countries share a 900-kilometre border, primarily between Pakistan's Balochistan province and Iran's Sistan Balochistan province. Fucking butchered those names. This region is populated by ethnic Baluch and a Sunni Muslim minority group that has long complained of marginalisation in both countries. These grievances have birthed separatist movements and armed insurgencies on both sides of the border. The militant group Jaish al-Adal, Army of Justice, formed by Iranian what's-his-face and operating from within Pakistan, is just one of several transnational threats both countries confront. According to Reuters, following Israeli strikes on Iran in mid-June, the group issued a call for widespread resistance, stating, this army extends the hand of brotherhood and calls on the people of Balochistan to join the ranks of the resistance. So now these historical armies are starting to say, hey, actually, maybe we should stop fighting each other. Maybe we need to start fighting against Israel, is it? Israeli strikes, on Iran. As Israel targets Iran's nuclear infrastructure with a series of airstrikes, its officials have made no secret of a broader goal to undermine, if not outright topple, the Iranian regime. In addition to fears of regional instability spilling over from Iran, Pakistan is also alarmed by the precedent Israel is setting by launching strikes on another nation's nuclear facilities. The concern is particularly acute given Pakistan's own rivalry with nuclear-armed neighbour India. The two countries were engaged in an intense 4-day conflict as recently as May. This alarmed Pakistani officials who fear the radicalization of their own population and the possibility of a broader, united, greater movement. This scenario was described by Islamabad-based analyst Simbal Khan to Reuters as a real risk. They're all going to fight together if this blows up. Khan warned there's a fear of ungoverned spaces which would be fertile ground for terrorist groups. The fear is not just theoretical. In January 2024, Iran launched unprecedented drone and missile strikes into this Pakistani area, targeting alleged militant sanctuaries. Pakistan responded with retaliatory airstrikes in Iran's province, claiming to have hit terrorist hideouts. So Pakistan stated that these strikes were a manifestation of its unflinching resolve to protect and defend its national security. So there is like some beef here, right? But instead of spiraling into prolonged conflict, both sides chose de-escalation, suspending cross-border trade temporarily but recommitting to border security cooperation. As senior Belarusian official Kadir Bakash, fucking hell man, I can't say this, confirmed to AFP, border crossings in 5 districts included were suspended. So they've stopped border crossings. This response reflects the shared understanding instability in one country risks fueling extremism in the other. So it seems like they've probably met behind closed doors and gone, hey, Israel is fucking up our shit. This is all kicking off. They're getting serious. We've had our beefs for a while, but maybe it's best for both of us to put this to one side, stop these petty border squabbles, and start working together. That would make a lot of sense, wouldn't it? As Pakistan's military conveyed in its meeting with US President Donald Trump, a collapse of authority in Iran could lead to an influx of militants and blah, blah, blah. So Iran's energy lifeline to Pakistan, beyond security concerns, Pakistan's energy crisis makes cooperation with Iran essential. According to Iran's Custom Administration, Iran exported $2.4 billion worth of non-oil goods to Pakistan in the last Iranian calendar year, making Pakistan its 5th largest export destination. So, you know, they're doing energy trade. The pipe at the center of Pakistan and Iran's energy cooperation lies the long-stalled gas pipeline, often called the Peace Pipeline. First proposed in 1995, the project gained traction with a formal agreement signed in Ankara in 2010. However, according to New Delhi-based Indian Council of World Affairs, the pipeline has been mired in delays for nearly 3 decades, probably because of some of these border disputes, I would imagine. And to do with US sanctions on Iran and mounting pressures on Pakistan. So it's mainly been built, but I don't think it's been finished. But they will probably start working on this to be finished, right? By 2014, not only had the project failed to make meaningful progress, so tensions escalated in 2019. Blah, 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 blah. Issued a force under the terms of gas sales and projection, claiming circumstances beyond its control. Tehran rejected this notice, but the agreement was subsequently amended, giving Pakistan an additional 5 years to complete construction. So Pakistan have not been actually finishing up this shit. So Iran have actually been, it looks like from what I'm seeing here, Iran have been more or less keeping to their, what would you call, their agreements and holding up their end of the bargain, but Pakistan have not. Approved the construction. So in February 2024, Pakistan improved the construction of an 80-kilometer segment of the pipeline near the Iranian border. The project will be financed through whatever the fuck. Still, US opposition continues to cast a long shadow over the project. So it looks like that might be close to being finished, and it's just Pakistan that have been kind of shit at making this happen. Allies then, allies now. Iran was the first country to recognize Pakistan following its independence in 1947. So the two nations were also strategic allies during the Cold War. Both were founding members of the Central Treaty Organization, formed on February 24th, 1955. So they do have some history of cooperation. Cultural ties have further deepened the relationship. Persian language, literature, and political philosophy have left a lasting imprint on Pakistani intellectual and cultural life, influencing everything from poetry to statecraft. Even if after Iran's 1979 Islamic Revolution, Pakistan was among the first nations to recognize the new regime. Despite international pressure, Islamabad extended support to Tehran during the Iran-Iraq war, highlighting the resilience of this strategic calculus. So they've been aligned before in different ways. So Pakistan's deepening alignment with Iran also reflects a shifting geopolitical calculation. Islamabad has long tried to balance its ties with Saudi Arabia and the United States, both adversaries of Tehran, but changing global dynamics are pulling Pakistan eastward. So, so I think it does seem like, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. There's frostiness there. There's frosty stuff going on between Pakistan and Iran, but they have been allies before. They could be allies again. It's seeming very likely that they are and will be allies in the future. So, is Pakistan gearing for war in India? Well, this will likely be one of the fronts of war if there is a world war, and I would say that it is probably quite likely. Pakistan have a history of attacking India, basically, via either terrorist attacks or even just outright military attacks. India have also responded with some military action here and there, but nowhere near the same as Pakistan. Pakistan have been the main and primary, the main primary aggressors in this situation. India and Pakistan are apparently preparing for a naval face-off as well. That was earlier in this month. Recent signals from both governments have underscored how their navies could play a central role in their next face-off. So they're not even denying it. They're like, yeah, we're going to have a next face-off. We just don't know when. And our navies will play a role in that. Right? We're going to have another face-off, guys. So will it be a nuclear war? I doubt it, personally. I don't think they actually want to destroy their countries. They want to take over their countries. They want to preserve those countries. Nuclear weapons are more or less a last resort that will most likely not be used even if the country loses said war. Although it may be a bargaining chip to use so that they don't lose the war as badly. So that would be my kind of take on that. But my guess is they will not use nuclear weapons. That's just my point of view there. Hey, I hope I'm right. I really hope. I could be wrong. Obviously, I could be wrong about a lot of things. These are all my opinions based on inferences of everything that I'm showing you here on stream. But my suspicion is more than likely nuclear weapons will not be used. Again, I've just looked into, this is just a Wikipedia just to show all the different conflicts that have happened over the years, and the vast majority of the time Pakistan are the aggressors, more or less. So, especially in the major conflicts. So, I just think that it's a very strong possibility that Pakistan, it does seem like Pakistan instigated the last one as well. There was a terrorist attack that India blamed on Pakistan, being funded by their government, and they've done this kind of stuff before. Now, I'm not saying that they will necessarily do that. India may strike first again. Maybe they're prepping and they're just going to go, you know what, we're not waiting for Pakistan to attack us. We're just going to go in. I don't really know. To be honest, it kind of is irrelevant. I just think there will be, no matter who starts it, it's kind of irrelevant who starts it. There will be a conflict with Pakistan and Israel fairly soon. When that happens, probably within the next year, who will support who? America will support India, obviously, just like they're supporting Israel, just like they're supporting Ukraine, and just like they will support South Korea if North Korea go into there. But we'll get to that in just a little bit. But let's just say all these conflicts kick off, and who supports who? Well, America's going to be supporting a lot of countries at once, aren't they? And they're going to be spread very thin. As we already currently know, their resources, their weapons resources, are very low. They're depleted right now. In fact, lots of the officials and military officials in America are worried that they don't have sufficient supplies just in case America get into their own hot war. We'll pull this up just now, just so we know I'm not talking shit. USA military supplies depleted or low, whatever. We'll just use keywords here. Yes, concerns exist around the depletion or low levels of certain US military supplies, particularly munitions and certain minerals. So when it comes to munitions are probably the most important part, right? Because it's no good having weapons if you've got no bullets. So due to factors like the conflict in Ukraine and historical procurement strategies, while the US military has substantial overall capabilities, some specific items, especially precision weaponry and artillery ammunition, are being depleted faster than they can be replaced, leading to potential shortages. So minerals, other factors. So again, I'm not going through all this. I'm just showing you that that point is real. There is a depletion. There is an issue with American resources. They're being stretched thin, and they're trying to do this more and more. The more conflicts that emerge, that America feels the need to support one side over the other to maintain its interests. Of course, this will create a problem for America to be able to defend itself and to actually fight robustly in its own direct war, which it will have eventually, but that war will not be with Iran. Or at least, maybe not directly, but they will have a direct war, but the direct war will not be Iran per se, right? More or less like by proxy, just through like allegiances. So again, we've got more proof here of Kim Jong-un overseeing special forces and tank drills to boost war preparations. So we've just got, this is again just to show the cooperation between North Korea and this new axis of evil, or whatever you want to call it, new axis of Asia, whatever it is. And they're learning from their combat experience, because North Korea has not actually fought in many wars since the North-South Korean War. Since then, the North Korean army has not really fought in any wars in recent years. So their military acumen is probably a little rusty at this point, and they're not as used to modern warfare and what that entails. They may have some of the technology, but they don't necessarily have the know-how, the tactics, the strategy. And what they're doing is, since they have been sending thousands of troops to Ukraine to fight there, they are coming back and they are learning from these experiences, and they are learning new techniques, learning new strategies, employing these with their military as it goes. And this is a very interesting development. So again, just trying to show and put in, I probably should have put that in a little bit earlier. Maybe I've mixed up the order a little bit here. I probably should have put that in a little bit later, but whatever, you get the picture. This stuff is all getting like more and more cohesive. Now, the Western countries at the moment are not prepared for this. The Western countries are not prepared for this level of organization between these countries and how to deal with it. Now, this article is just more or less just to illustrate a certain point. So, this article itself is more about how Western governments are being very punitive against protests and riots and things like that within Europe. But the reason I'm bringing up this article is actually to show that there is mass unrest and deep mistrust of the governments in Western nations. Now, you can say this comes from, propaganda, from this new axis of Asia, or whatever you want to call it. But I don't think... that could be a part of it, but I also think it's just the governments themselves running their shit badly. right? They're very greedy, very exploitative. They use ideological points of view to fuck over the populace, alienate them. So I don't think it's just like, oh, it's all just propaganda and stuff. There's multiple reasons why the populace are in this situation. But the point of this article is just to show that there are mass protests, mass movements going on against the government, which means that the countries are in disarray. The countries themselves are in disarray already and facing internal struggles in ways that countries like North Korea, China, Russia, although they may have some problems too, are not necessarily facing them in the same way as the European countries are. So where did it say? It had like a little bit of a list of some of these countries. Here we go. It's reported incidents resulted in serious and sometimes permanent injuries, including broken bones or teeth, and that was in France, Germany, Greece, Italy. The loss of a hand in France. The loss of a testicle in Spain. That's nice and juicy. Juicy testicle. And dislocated bones, damage to eyes, severe head trauma. That was also Spain. In some countries, the use of force amounted to torture or other ill treatment, and in Belgium, Finland, France, Germany, Italy, Poland, Slovenia, Serbia, and Switzerland, excessive use of force were used by law enforcement against children. The research found cases of police impunity, or lack of accountability in numerous countries, including Austria, Belgium, France, Greece, Germany, Italy, Portugal, Serbia, Slovenia, Spain, Switzerland, Turkey, and the UK. So, and that's another player that I forgot to mention, and that's another player in this equation, Turkey. Where do they fall in all this? Maybe we should have a quick look. Turkey and Iran. Oh, Iran alliance. Let's see if there's anything there to look to see. So the two states have complex relationships. So I do know that Iran has a relationship with Syria. Again, it's always a bit complex, these relationships, but in recent times, Iran has tried to strengthen and bolster their relationship with Syria. So they're saying that in Syria and the Caucasus, through supporting opposite proxies, blah, 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 blah. However, both countries also have some shared interests, as both are trade and economic partners and also work on security-related issues. So I wonder, has Iran and Turkey ran any military drills recently? There is no information about recent joint military drills between Turkey and Iran. However, they have conducted drills in the past, focused on border security and responding to simulated terrorist attacks. Their relationship is complex, with both cooperation and competition in areas like Syria and the Caucasus. Okay, so past drills. Turkey and Iran have held joint military exercises, including drills. Okay. Azerbaijan and Turkey in joint military exercises on Iranian soil. I'm assuming that is what that is, right? On Iranian border. So Iranian and Armenian militaries drill. And that was in April. So maybe we've got a bit of an Armenian connection here. What's Azerbaijani? Where's Azerbaijan? I can't think of where that is right now. Or is that just actually just a country in of itself? I felt like Azerbaijan was a city, but okay, it doesn't matter. Maybe it's a country. So Iran announces first joint military drills with Saudi Arabia in the Red Sea. Really? In 10th of April, Armenia and Iran hold joint military drills. So, yeah, this is... maybe Turkey is a little bit of a wild card in all this. We can't necessarily hang our hats on Turkey, which way Turkey would go. But again, there's lots of key players. We don't really know which way they would go, especially in the Middle East. What's going to happen there? So it's a struggle, right? It's a struggle to understand what's going on here now. So So, and this article here that I've got here, this is the National Institute of Economic and Social Research, and this is the UK. This is just for the UK. Now, this trend holds in many European countries. I'm just using the UK as an example here, but I'm just trying to outline how the economies have been kind of wrecked, so that they're kind of in disarray. They cannot muster, they cannot support themselves in the same way as they would have done if they had a stronger, more robust economy. So the key findings: the poorest households in Slovenia and Malta are now better off than the poorest in the UK, whereas real incomes grew consistently before the 2008 financial crisis. The stagnation afterwards has meant that other countries have overtaken the UK in standard of living. Regional income growth is some of the slowest in Europe. The UK has some of the least generous welfare across the OECD. Welfare has only covered the cost of essentials in 2 out of the last 14 years. The UK is neither a high wage nor high welfare country. So basically, the economy has completely stagnated for normal people and for living standards. And this is not unique to the UK. This kind of thing is happening all over Europe in different ways. Now, you can maybe say some of them are doing a bit better than others and all that stuff. The point being is there's a general trend. There's a general trend of this type of stagnation going on all over Europe. Unrest, protests going on. I'm just trying to illustrate that there's a lot of bullshit going down, right? Again, this is a Google search. So recent civil unrest in the US. So it's not even just Europe, it's also happening in the US. Recent reports indicate a heightened risk of civil unrest in the US. So we've just seen those ICE protests, the No Kings protests. They're getting violent and stuff. There's been multiple strings of mass violent unrest going on since 2020, actually. Lots of vast swaths of the US population, both on the left and on the right, are vehemently against the government in many different ways, and sometimes coalesce. You wouldn't think it, but sometimes the left and the right actually coalesce on some of this shit. So again, I'm just trying to show that there's like this very broad issue going on within most of these countries that does take up lots of time, lots of effort, lots of money, is throwing the economy into disarray, does not have social cohesion. If America and China went to war, for instance, how much of the public would actually want to serve in that? Because they don't trust their government and they don't want to actually bolster this war. There may be lots of resistance against that. In fact, it may even trigger a civil war within the USA itself if America went to war with China. It's even getting close to that right now, because even both the left and right on Twitter last night, when the Iran bombings were announced, both the left and the right were saying, oh my God, I can't believe America and Trump has lied to the people. We're going into World War III. We're not going to stand for this. Both the left and the right were saying that. Both of them. So how this couldn't trigger some kind of like mass crazy bullshit in the US, I don't know. To me, it seems very probable that there's like a lot of shit can go down, okay? A lot of fucking shit can go down because of all this. Now, again, I want to show just some on the ground, some of these riots in Europe. So we've got Spain has some anti-tourism protests going on right now. And again, if you're anti-tourist, that's also going to disrupt their economy, right? Because a lot of Spanish economy is actually made up from tourism. Now, I understand that it's up to the people what they want and what they don't want. So I'm not saying that they should be forced to have tourism if they want it. But what I'm getting at is, if they did expel tourism, if they stopped tourism from coming into the country through these protests, through these marches, making it less desirable for tourists to go there, that will disrupt their economy and their ability to muster and participate in a world war. Next up, in the last few weeks, we've had mass immigration riots in France that were quite brutal and far-reaching. Again, in fact, if France It's been non-stop since COVID in France, just non-stop riots constantly, every other week, every other month. There's big, huge riots going on in Paris and all over France in general. This is a big, big issue. So again, this inhibits France's social cohesion and their ability to muster in a world war situation. We've got Budapest, which is Hungary, is it not? Sorry, oh, shit's playing. Why won't it... Pause. So again, we've got Hungarians declare civil resistance in Orbán government. There's other countries like this too. It's not just Hungary. There's others like Bosnia and all this stuff where there's loads of shit going down. They cannot necessarily... Again, it's like if China were going to spring an attack on Taiwan, now is the time while all this disarray is going on, all this bullshit is going down. So we're looking at Western economies stagnating. Several factors are contributing to a sense of stagnation in Western economies, with slow growth, sluggish productivity, and rising inequality being key concerns. While some economies like the US have shown resilience, other, particularly in Europe, face significant headwinds. So again, that's just to illustrate a point. I'm not going to be running down the gamut on that one, but that is just to illustrate a point that that is a thing that's going on. So next up, how is World War III going to be imminent? How is this going to happen? So World War III will be triggered by China. No doubt about it. China will trigger World War III, and they're going to trigger it by attacking Taiwan. And they know that they're going to do that, and they're gearing up for that. They're emboldening their allies to stretch America thin so that then when they do strike and create and basically trigger World War III, they will be in the most advantageous position possible. China right now are nowhere near as stretched thin in terms of their military capacities. In fact, they are completely outstripping and outproducing America on almost every level. They're also conducting many different military drills around Taiwan, and these military drills are more or less a precursor to invasion. They're literally just practice drills for invasion. They're trying to get it perfect, picture perfect, so when they invade, they can just do it straight up in one fell swoop. I think that's what they want to do, and that's why they've been doing this so much. In fact, just the other day, they sent a bunch of planes over the line. Yeah, dozens of planes across the central line Taiwan Strait, and what they were probably doing there by doing that was timing it. They were probably timing how fast can we get our planes in this area. That's what they were doing, 100%. So, fuck off. So, again, I don't need to read all this. We just know it's happened, right? They're sending their planes over. They want to know how quickly can we get our planes there, especially if we're going to be supporting our ships that are coming over. Now, they've been actually deploying and creating ships that can move shitloads of tanks. They've created ships that have bridges on them that can have multiple tanks on each ship. So they can have, like, I don't know what the number is, but let's just say it's like 10 tanks a ship. It's probably more than that, actually. But let's just say it's 10 tanks per ship. Now, normally what it would be is you'd have to have several ships across from each other, bringing them over. Or maybe it would be aircraft carriers to drop one or two. Not aircraft carriers, sorry. The planes, like these big plane things that can drop tanks in. But they can only bring like one or two. But what China have been developing is these massive ships that have bridges between them that can then roll out loads of tanks in one go. And they would only need to dock one ship at the shore, and the rest could be in the sea. So they wouldn't need to dock up loads of ships on a part of on a beach where they'd have to have lots of headway and stuff like that. They could dock up on a narrow area and then ship loads of tanks all in one go from one place. Let's see if I can find these Chinese boats with bridges for tanks. Images. Yes, so here it is. New landing barges. That's what they are. So if you see here, look, they're connected from the back, and then the tanks roll down here and they come out onto the beach. So instead of having several ships that need to come up here and take up loads of space and be probably more difficult to organize and more difficult to deal with, you could literally create a big, like, ladder almost. It's kind of a little bit like what Alexander the Great did. Alexander the Great, he once besieged a area. I can't remember which part of Greece it was, or maybe it was Turkey or some shit. Or maybe, I don't know, I can't remember exactly where it was, but he was besieging somewhere, and they needed to, you know, obviously get over from one side to another, and they built these really long rafts that basically just became a bridge and transported the army over. They left some of the army to be like a distraction, and then they sent the rest behind the back, and then they didn't anticipate that they would build this bridge. They built a bridge, sent everyone over, and they fucked them up basically from behind. And it looks like China are looking to do something in a similar vein, but with boats. So here we go. Here's a aerial shot of that. I don't know if you guys can see that exactly. Fuck me. Open link in new window. Whatever. No! Click the wrong thing. Open image in new tab. Oh my god, why is life so hard? Right, so if you see here, look, you'd have lots of vehicles on here, and then they'd all come down here onto one part of the beach. And this would mean that you could have loads of tanks on one of these barges, and then you could have another aircraft carrier over here with lots of personnel. Then you could have another aircraft carrier that is coming in with the planes. It basically means you can have this like ultra rapid deployment on beaches for an invasion. So this is nothing to sniff at, guys. They're really preparing for this. China are not... These methods, it's implicit in the methods that they're employing. If you look at the engineering, the things that they're looking to create, they're not just creating an aircraft carrier because we just need a big bad aircraft carrier to compete with technology with the Americas or whatever. They're specifically creating this stuff for very particular uses and deployments. Why else would they be making these things unless it was for that? Now, we're going to get into some rhetoric now. So China recently said, when was this? This was in March this year. China says it is ready for any type of war with the US. Any type of war. So this is in response to some of these tariffs and stuff, right? Which were probably kind of like a bit of a double-edged sword as a thing. But I think it did kind of force China's hand to be a bit more... they had to be a little bit more compliant. They were a little bit of a battering thing. I don't think it was all like so great for China. I think they did have to comply a little bit with what America wanted to do, which they didn't like, obviously, because it did put them at a disadvantage. But I think more or less China are going to move forward with their plans no matter what America do to try and stave off a hot war. But they will do a hot war, no doubt about it. So officials in Beijing had been hopeful that the US-China relations under Trump could get off to a more cordial start after he invited Xi to his inauguration. Trump also said the two leaders had a great phone call just a few days before he entered the White House. There are reports that the two leaders were due to have another call last month, but that did not happen. Xi had already been battling persistently low consumption, a property crisis, and unemployment. China has pledged to pump billions of dollars into its ailing economy, and leaders unveil blah, 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 blah. China has the world's second largest military budget at $245 billion, but it is far smaller than that of the US. Beijing spends 1.6% of GDP on its military, far less than the US or Russia, according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. However, analysts believe China downplays how much it spends on defense. Now who does that remind you of? Maybe a funny man with a mustache in the heart of Europe, who consistently lied about his machinations and his expenditure on military military expansion. So yeah. So basically, these guys are, who knows what China is up to right now? Who really knows the full extent of China's arsenal right now? Is China preparing to invade Taiwan? Yes, obviously. China's attempt to conquer Taiwan by force could be imminent, US Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth has warned. And when did this come out? This was updated 5 days ago. But when did it actually come out? It actually doesn't say, so I'm going to assume it was 5 days ago, but I don't really know. China's attempt to conquer Taiwan by force could be imminent. There's no reason to sugarcoat it. The threat China poses is real. Speaking at the 2025 Shangri-La Dialogue Defense Summit in Singapore, Beijing is credibly preparing to potentially use military force to alter the balance of power in the Indo-Pacific. And to be clear, any attempt by Communist China to conquer Taiwan by force would result in devastating consequences for the Indo-Pacific and the world. What he means there is it will trigger World War III. Taiwan split from the People's Republic of China during a civil war in the 1940s, but Beijing has always viewed the island as a rogue breakaway territory to be brought back under control by force if necessary, making it arguably the most dangerous place on Earth. I don't know if I'd go that far, but it could eventually become so. How likely is an invasion? Experts disagree about the likelihood and timing of a Chinese invasion, said the Council of Foreign Relations think tank. China has been engaging in unprecedented aggression and military modernization. Admiral Samuel Paparo, the commander of U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, told the U.S. Armed Services Committee in April, underscoring the seriousness of this escalation. He said, China's drills around Taiwan are not just exercises, they are rehearsals. Just as I said earlier, the high-ranking military officials perceive the exact same things that I am perceiving. So please, tomfoolery, listen to what I'm saying. I'm not just pulling shit out of my arse, okay? Maybe I was pulling some shit out of my arse about the COVID shit. But when it comes to China wanting to have World War III, that is not bullshit, okay? This is thought of by credible people within the military. While alarming, said the Atlantic Council, this unfortunately reflects a broader, consistent trend of escalating activities by the People Liberation Army, the PLA, including persistent crossings of the Taiwan Straits Median Line. Data from Taiwan's Ministry of National Defense found that sorties across from the Taiwanese declared dividing line between Taiwan and China have increased from 903 incidents in 2021 to 3,070 in 2024. They're basically just fucking doing whatever they want. Right? They're basically just doing whatever the fuck they want. There are other indications Beijing is preparing to move on Taiwan. China has been stockpiling record amounts of gold, which could be part of a strategy to defend itself from Western sanctions in the event of attack on Taiwan. In fact, that's almost exactly what that is. It has also been building a solid legal ground for a potential invasion. It's probably also a tech thing because you need to use gold a lot in tech. So they're probably hoarding a lot of gold so that when the tech war arises, they may be able to last out longer in that situation. That one is like a very spurious. I am just kind of speculating on that one, but obviously because I do know that you need gold for lots of like chipsets and stuff like that, then yeah, that's definitely a possibility, which could be but I think the main thing is just like, yeah, the kind of sanction thing. I think that's probably the main reason altogether. There are other indications Beijing is preparing to move on Taiwan. China has been I just read that. It's also been building a solid legal ground for a potential invasion, aiming to frame the attack as a legitimate internal matter. This will help the country to delay a collective security and economic response from the West. When could an invasion happen? Paparo told members of Congress that the PLA are stretching their legs to meet President Xi Jinping's military readiness goal of being capable of taking Taiwan by force by 2027. Oh God, the cat just jumped on me. That year is seen as magical because it marks the centenary of what was to become the People's Liberation Army. I don't even know what that means. Centenary. I don't think I've ever seen that word. Centenary. Okay, whatever. Um, Others believe 2049 is a critical date, says the CFR, as Xi Jinping has emphasized that unification with Taiwan is essential to achieving what he calls the Chinese dream, which sees China's great power status restored by 2049. No, that's the end result. That's after the war. He's talking about after the war. Yeah, he's saying, okay, that makes a lot more sense. If this is coming from Xi Jinping himself, this makes a lot of sense. So they want to take Taiwan by 2027. They want to be ready to do it, so they'll fight that war. They anticipate that there will probably be a world war. So that will probably take several years, if not 10 years or more, to deal with. Then you've got the fallout after that, the rebuilding, restructuring part of it all. So in their idea, if they win this war, which is obviously what they intend to do, they want to win this war. So they will are trying to create the conditions where by 2049 they will be the new global hegemon. They will be the ruling country, as it were, in the world. The one that influences how countries operate, their financial, physical policies, their trade agreements, their, the sanctions, what they can, how they can probably begin to oppress capitalism, I guess, more or less, or at least maybe not capitalism, like maybe the Western style of capitalism rather than the Chinese style or whatever. But you get what I'm trying to say. I think that is their. I mean, I'm just going to take it at face value. I think this is their goal. So they're saying, oh, they would invade Taiwan by 2049. No, I think they want it all to be done and dusted by 2049. And after the smoke clears, China is sat on the throne where America used to be. How can an invasion start? Chinese military drills last year surrounded Taiwan's main island with joint exercises by all branches of the PLA, and for the first time, the increasingly militarized Coast Guard as well. So they just brought everyone in the kitchen sink for that one. And when was that? That was... it just said last year. In January, Naval News first reported the construction of new amphibious barges. So again, they're developing new technologies for specific reasons. These new barge, what are they called? Shakyao ships are potentially a game changer for Beijing and provide insight into China's integration of its military, paramilitary, and civilian operations and its plans for a potential invasion. The barges feature bridges that could be... Okay, this is what I just brought up before. I haven't even read this article before. But this is just what I've read before. That would mean in the early hours of a Chinese invasion, the narrow strait separating the island from the mainland would likely be transformed into a ferocious battlefield. So previously, this would not be possible. That's the point. Previously, this would not be possible without these barges, but these barges now make this possible. Aside from deploying more traditional weapons such as missiles or warships, vast fleets of unmanned aerial and naval drones will likely darken the skies and hide beneath waves, bringing with them a daily threat that Taiwan and its allies are ill-prepared to counter. During Joe Biden's presidency, the US strategy to counter this, dubbed Hellscape, hinged on deploying thousands of new drones that would swarm the Taiwan Strait and keep China's military busy until more help could arrive. Now, does anyone remember? In New Jersey, a UFO sighting occurred that looked strangely like a bunch of military drones coming out in unison and flying into the air. Now, New Jersey's probably not the best place to have that, but maybe that was just a little bit of smoke and mirrors. Oh, we'll conduct this military operation. We'll pretend it's a UFO, but in reality, all the countries out there will know this is our drone capability and the uniformity and the technology that we have. And we'll do a little bit of smoke and mirrors. We'll make it seem like we've got this on the East Coast. But in reality, we would actually deploy this on the East Coast, ready to head out to Taiwan, right? Just a suspicion that I have. How would it play out? Chinese action against Taiwan would be an act of war that sparks a global crisis, i.e. World War III, said the Wall Street Journal. It would provoke a military response by Taiwan, force President Trump to decide whether the US military should defend the island, disrupt global trade, and impel European nations to impose punishing sanctions on Beijing. If a conflict were to break out, it would be a catastrophe, said the Economist. This is the first because of the bloodshed in Taiwan, but also because of the risk of escalation between two nuclear powers, namely US and China. Beijing massively outguns Taiwan. With estimates from the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute showing that China spent about 23 times more on its military in 2021. The PLA also boasts more than 2 million active soldiers. And who's to say that China wouldn't also conscript? Remember, China has like 2 billion fucking people. They could conscript and get a lot of people. The US is bound by Taiwan Relations Act to provide Taiwan with arms of a defensive character and discourage China from using force or coercion to achieve its goals regarding the island. This could see Washington drawn into any conflict, although there is growing skepticism in Taipei that Trump would intervene militarily in the event of a full-blown Chinese attack, which could also embolden China to do the attack if they feel that they are not going to be resisted. That means any invasion would be one of the most dangerous and consequential events of the 21st century and would make the Russian attack on Ukraine look like a sideshow by comparison. Yeah, absolutely. So we've got another article here. I don't know if I'll go all through this, but this is just to say that we may already be seeing the end of one of these conflicts. And if the end of this conflict comes about in the next couple of years before China attacks Taiwan, then that would position China in a very good place, wouldn't it? Because then they would have one of their allies, i.e. Russia, now free at hand, fresh from their war with Ukraine, ready to take on a new challenge. So I think this is important to know. I'm not going to read all this, but basically I read most of this, and more or less what it's saying is there's a good reason to believe that Russia are winning the war in Ukraine. And this is based on casualties, which are kind of dubious. We have to kind of be dubious about this because they're coming. It's an active war zone, so you can't necessarily get them properly. But there's munition shortages. There are technology shortages. There's manpower shortages for Ukraine. There's a lot of shortages for Ukraine going on right now, and it's actually quite difficult for them to keep this going. The drone stuff is keeping them going. I'll read the conclusion here. If you want to have the full details, you can read the whole thing. Again, I'll put all the links to these in the description after. But as of right now, Ukraine still holds cards at negotiating table. Its army is still in the field, contesting every meter of ground, but time is running out for the Ukrainians. Ukraine has significant problems with manpower. The balance of power is shifting in Russia's favour, and at some point Ukrainians will start facing the collapse of the front. This outcome is more likely given to the negative trend in decision-making by Ukrainian political leadership. Unless they begin to conserve combat power, collapse is growing more likely. Ukraine needs a ceasefire now to gain breathing room for restoring its combat power and improving its standing at the peace negotiations. The Russians are in the opposite situation. Russian advantages in manpower and equipment are growing. Russia is fielding an equivalent of 2 new divisions a month. Battlefield conditions and growing combat power mean that they are unlikely to accept any ceasefire until final peace terms are agreed. Something they have already made clear. They are also likely to stretch out the negotiation process to improve their battlefield position. Time is on their side, and unless peace can be agreed to now, they are on a path to victory which could have devastating political and economic consequences for the rest of Europe. Now, I don't think Russia would then invade more of Europe. I think they would just secure Ukraine and then use that to bolster their rearmament. They would use their gains from Ukraine to bolster their rearmament. And then during that time, while they're bolstering their rearmament, they would probably then supplement the Chinese or even the North Korean armies, or whoever goes next, the Pakistani armies, whoever goes next, Iran, maybe they'll help. In fact, we will look at this in just a second, but there is some talk already of Russia joining the war with Iran against Israel. There's already some talk of that today. So we will have a little look at that in just a moment. But Western powers have staked the liberal world order on the outcome of this war. Negotiated peace on Russian terms today could be bad, but betting on an unlikely improvement in battlefield condition and losing would be far worse. The US appears to be taking the former path, with Secretary of Defense Peter Hegseth signaling to the Russians that the US is serious about negotiations by taking Ukrainian NATO membership off the table. The EU, however, chose the latter path by promising support as long as it takes and to negotiate from a position of strength, not realising that strength is measured in combat and industrial power, not bold statements. The current trends on the battlefield are more supportive of the US position. It gives the US a chance to contain the fallout from the Ukrainian war to Europe and to preserve its global leadership, especially the dominant role of the US dollar. With the US increasingly seeing the war as a liability, Ukraine's negotiating position is at risk of unraveling. Even with US support, Ukraine's battlefield position is deteriorating. Without US support, Ukraine's chances of battlefield collapse are vastly higher, even with continued EU aid. Right now, Russians are demanding Crimea and 4 of Ukraine's oblasts. I'm assuming that's like these eastern regions. A ban on Ukraine entering NATO and the EU, and guaranteed rights for Russian speakers. These demands are for regions where the Russian army already controls 60% or more of the territory. Should Ukraine collapse, and the Russian army will surge forward, pushing the line of contact deeper into Ukraine, and terms can get worse. There is a good chance that Russia will go for all of Novorossiya, adding Kharkiv, Odessa, and these are all like fairly built-up industrial areas that could provide a lot of use to Russia. Mykolaiv, Poltava, and whatever the fuck that says, oblast to its demands, as well as referendums on secession in Transcarpathia, and if the political climate in Romania is favourable, the northern Bukovina and other Romanian-speaking areas as well, buying off select NATO members with territories to split the unity of alliance. This will reduce Ukraine to a landlocked rump state based around Kiev, Chernihiv, and Lviv. I don't know how you fucking say that. The real question is, can Ukraine gain an acceptable, if better, peace now, or will it keep fighting, risking a military collapse and a far worse Russian dictate later? So when was this article written? I think it was pretty recent. It was May 05, so just a month ago, more or less. Maybe a month and a half ago. So I think that has probably deteriorated from there. Russia has still not given any ceasefire, right? I think there's a severe problem here. And to be honest with you, Ukraine, the guy who runs Ukraine, he's done a very admirable job, all things considered. But I think his ego has got into his head. He wants to hold out. He does not want to surrender in any way, shape, or form. He will probably make the mistake of fighting to the bitter end. And in making that mistake, Russia will take Ukraine. That is my prediction. Russia will take Ukraine. And if Russia does not take Ukraine, they will take most of Ukraine. They will take lots of it and reap the rewards of that. which is sad. Very sad, but is a very likely situation. And then Russia will then be free to rearm themselves. They're already rearming themselves during the Ukrainian war right now. They're actually already rearming themselves now. So we've got Iran and Syria. Again, I'm not really going to run through this too much, but basically, Iran and Syria do have some history. They may team up, especially with the regime change in Syria right now. So there's lots of players, lots of ways the wind can blow, lots of ways that these countries can embolden themselves and, you know, just kind of be emboldened to take more risky actions. And I think we just really need to get real with this. We really need to get real with this. World War III is on the horizon. China is pushing with it. They want it to happen. And they're trying to make the most advantageous conditions they possibly can before they strike. And I will stand on that. I think that is it's a very palpable and imminent prediction. And I find it very unsettling that people are not willing to face this problem. So is this still live? Is this still live? This is all still live. How do we see all this? Because I want to... I can't, like, back up the stream. I can't back up the stream to actually witness what Putin is actually saying right now. If I put in the last hour... Putin, and let's do, shall we do, oh, type video, oh, okay, yeah. So we've already got that there. US attacks Iran live, Trump strikes 3 nuclear, that was streamed 34 minutes ago, Trump versus Iran, Iran strikes back. Where is Putin in this? I wanna see. Okay, let's just see where we're at in these live streams. Where are we with this?
This possibility is being openly discussed by Mr. Netanyahu, by Mr. Trump.
No, that's very bad translator stuff.
Would the Russian Federation react to this?
Okay, we might have just come in at the perfect time.
I have already spoken about this. I just did not articulate it clearly enough. I apologize for what I said unclearly. In general, we know the background of our relations. We know what happened in the 1940s. We know what happened during the Second World War. And we know how much effort was made by the Soviet Union, the Russian Federation, and Germany to heal the wounds of the past. And we managed to do this in many ways. This applies to East Germany, the German Democratic Republic, but it also applies to Western Germany, the Federal Republic. It is enough to remember what Willy Brandt and his party comrades did. Kohl also did a lot. The Soviet Union opposed the division of Germany. It was not the Soviet Union's initiative to divide Germany after the Second World War. We were against it. And in any case, no one doubts that in the 1990s, it was Russia, the Soviet Union, and Russia who played a decisive role in uniting Germany and breaking the wall. I hope no one in Germany has forgotten this. I would like to underline that our representative
this is
of
like,
the Russian...
okay, I think I might just have to end the stream here because I'm not going to wait for him to say all this shit. I'm going to have to come back to this once these reports, these interviews have taken place, and get a video that's splices up some key points to go over, because I don't want to be sat here for ages waiting for him to get to a point. So, but like I say, there's talks right now, and it does seem that Putin is threatening to enter the war himself on Iran's side, obviously. So we don't know that for sure. I want to see his exact statements on that before I really make a judgment on that. But there does seem to be some talk of that. So anyway, I'm going to end the stream here, but this stream was more or less to back up some of the things I was saying in the tomfoolery debate that I had earlier, and to show that I'm not just some crazy crackpot. I am making inferences of what is going on, why these people are working together. China does want a world war. It's been pushing for that for a while. It's creating technologies purposefully for invasion. It's doing things on purpose because they're gearing up for this. They're co-opting together. They're coalescing together. Russia and North Korea are working together. They're building factories to send arms to each other specifically for that reason. They're doing all these things together purposefully because they know they're preparing for a world war. This is not a drill, guys. This is gonna happen. No matter what anybody says, this is gonna happen. And I'm not just saying it out of ignorance. I'm not saying it like I'm a conspiracy theorist, right? The COVID stuff, okay, maybe you can call me a conspiracy theorist there. You know, whatever. To me, it's kind of irrelevant in some respects if they did it on purpose or not, because the effects are still the effects, and what's happened is still happening. So whether they saw it as an opportunity to start doing all this stuff because it was an accident, or whether they are using it as an opportunity because they did it on purpose as a springboard, either way, it's kind of irrelevant, because no matter what you want to say, the events have happened as they've happened. I have my suspicions around the COVID thing. That's my personal belief. You obviously don't have to believe that, but I just think that it's probably more likely than it's not, unfortunately. So I will leave it there. Thanks everyone for tuning in. There probably won't be that many eyes on this one because we went back to some political stuff, and the people aren't that interested in the political stuff on this channel, unfortunately. But I do have a very big interest in this stuff, and I just think it's very worthwhile to give a decent perspective on this. So yeah, there you go. I've just shown everything I can possibly show. Hopefully now you get a better idea of where I'm coming from. Tomfoolery, maybe you might watch this. I hope you do, so you can see that I'm not just chatting shit. So yeah, that's it. Thank you very much, everyone. Like, subscribe, do all that fucking gay shit.